politics meets real life. We break down state and federal issues, showing how policy shapes everyday Americans. Engaged, balanced, and informative. That's our promise. I'm your host, Mikkel Jenkins,
And I'm Muhammad Ali.
and we are going to be providing updates on the Iran US Israeli war, as well as some domestic pieces. And I know we've gotten away from it, focusing on the Supreme Court, but there is a case that will be taken up that the Supreme Court is skeptical on. We will be getting into that as well. So, definitely a jam packed episode. And thank you to all of our dedicated listeners as we start to get towards that 1,000 download mark. So, thank you all again. So we will jump right into it as the US Israeli Iran war now enters its fourth week on March 23rd. Markets reacted sharply to President Trump's announcement that US strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure are postponed for 5 days, pending success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. This is all coming from the president himself. As we all know, oil prices plunged by approximately 10 to 14% in early trading, offering temporary relief at the pump after weeks of volatility triggered by Iran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm sure everyone throughout the weekend saw these gas prices just shooting up. I mean, even today I saw 393 actually, just for regular gas. So
Yeah.
as all of these,
I saw diesel above $5 in Pennsylvania, and
yeah,
that's crazy.
it's, I
Above
mean,
$5
even
diesel.
me and my girlfriend, we both used to have cars that required premium gas.
Yeah.
So
Ooh.
that's almost at like
Ooh.
450. So I'm like, we were talking, we're like, we're so glad we don't have those cars anymore. And what I've also have been listening is that I'm an individual that works from home 2 days out of the week. But as this continues, and experts are saying it's going to go into 27, early 28, it's like working from home conditions may be opening back up to give another level of relief to the commuters that have to drive the hour to work and so forth. And continuing on that, I've seen multiple videos actually of motorists who are going to these gas stations and are even speaking to the level of dilution of the oil that's been happening in that as they go about their daily routes as they normally would. They're starting to notice that they are running out of gas a lot quicker, and that
Yeah.
something isn't adding up. So I am going to be looking into that a little bit deeper insight when we come back on next. My mom is actually going to mom and stepdad are actually going to do a survey of that on their own car, basically gauge how much they would normally do it on regular prices, and then basically see how fast the gas is burning, basically.
Yeah.
And as we all know, the Strait of Hormuz, which controls about 20% of oil, has really been a hot topic in the last few days. Honestly, Trump has outlined a potential deal in terms of a ceasefire that he describes as major points of agreement, including Iran committing not to pursue nuclear weapons, halting uranium enrichment, and handing over existing stockpiles, agreeing to say low key on the missiles, and reopening Strait of Hormuz to all shipping. In his own words, Trump said, if they carry through with that, it will end the conflict. They want to make a deal. We want to make a deal too. If this happens, it is a great start for Iran to build itself back. He also floated the possibility of future joint US Iran control of the strait following any regime change in Tehran. And it was also noted that the Washington Post has actually stated that it is not possible for the theocratic regime of Iran to be overthrown. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a strategic failure across the board. And he's stating that it would be U.S. Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz when he's been constantly touting his chest and beating his chest and stating, we either don't need it or we're going to send in our own individuals to get it or we'll bring in a coalition. All of those things have faltered flat up to the point where he's now stating it's just going to be U.S. and Iran to control the strait. So Iran will still have that control with whatever negotiations that are finalized that lay out the framework for the United States level of control within the strait. But at the same time, no major achievements, no major objectives, should I say, have been achieved with this war. Only thing
Yeah.
that was achieved was the removal of the Ayatollah, but that's about it.
And what I want to add on top of that too is that the Iran is actually going against what Trump said regarding
Yeah,
peace talks,
multiple
saying there
times.
actually is no peace talks ongoing. And we'll get a bit more into this in a little bit. But there was a big move in the stock market when that news was announced, and then just seeing
Hmm.
how many there was like a very big high volume purchase of just the S&P itself and the index, like stock in general,
Yeah.
5 minutes before the announcement was announced. And I think that it's interesting asking what's the goal of this war, you know? It really does give off
I
similar
mean,
vibes to Vietnam and the whole idea of in Vietnam, it was to stop the spread of communism. Like, how are you gonna do that by sending in the military?
right.
You know what I mean? It's not like it was China coming in and invading all of Vietnam. It was just the communist ideology spread.
Exactly. And
And
it's
so
yeah,
I would say with Iran, it's like if you want to claim control of the strait, that's going to be fighting against the whole military of Iran on their home base halfway across the world,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it's a
Like
damn big ask.
it's a huge ask. I even saw that Iran released like a kiddish style video to kind of detail to Trump kind of what would happen if they were to go at the Strait of Hormuz and also the traffic that goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is funny. And I think they also did a Lego skit that they put out about President Trump being basically worried, scared about this ongoing conflict with Iran, which
Not looking good
kudos
for
to
the
them.
polls.
Yeah, no, not looking good on the polls at all. And even the Republican Party itself is finding itself trapped on many levels, not just on the Iran war, but on the SAVE Act as well, which we're going to get into, which ties into what you're seeing going on at TSA. And we'll have all the facts for you once we get to that domestic section. But
I've
it's
seen
a
some of
lot
those
going on
lines
there.
at the airports, man. It's crazy.
Oh,
Hours long to get through TSA. And
it's
I fly in a
insane.
few weeks. Hopefully, BWI ain't that backed up.
Yeah, hopefully BWI isn't that backed up. But this is the same playbook that he did with the border wall bill when Biden was president. Had worked with Republicans to get nothing brought up for a vote. Immigration was running wild. The votes were there. Trump spoke privately to Republicans to not have them put up the vote before the elections were coming around, the 2024 elections. So the Republicans did not vote on the Secure the Border Act, even though it was in a bipartisan agreed upon bill that both parties agreed on. Donald Trump took it on his own inclination to torpedo the whole thing just so that he can better position himself for the presidency, which he did ultimately win. But we will dive into that deeper in the domestic section. But as the administration notified Israel of these talks, such as the talks about the Strait of Hormuz and the fake news on the ceasefire that Trump's been spouting
The
on
fake news.
Monday,
What
yeah, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
it
But
is. It is.
today, senior Israeli officials indicated that contacts are underway to arrange a potential meeting between senior Iranian and U.S. officials in Islamabad, Islamabad, which is in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Later this week, with JD Vance reportedly being considered as the lead American representative. Pakistan is positioning themselves in a way as being the peace broker out of all this, even though we were talking on our last podcast how they are now being looked at as a nuclear threat by the administration in Israel at some levels.
Yeah.
Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan have been quietly passing messages between Washington and Tehran in an effort to de escalate the conflict. And Pakistan, in particular, as I was saying, is positioning itself as the lead mediator, in particularly leveraging Army Chief uh, Munin, Munir. I believe I might be saying that right or wrong, but he
Munich.
has longstanding ties to Tehran, and his warm relationship with President Trump makes these negotiations a little bit more viable. This individual spoke with Trump directly on Sunday, and according to the Financial Times, and the U.S. is also considering plans to occupy Iran's Craig Islands, the country's main oil export hub, to pressure Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping. And Trump warned that if talks fail, the U.S. will just keep bombing, which is nothing short of surprisement from what we've already been seeing. And even when deals were on the table before this conflict started, we just decided to bomb them anyway. So we're seeing a lot of military action and potential talks starting to shape, but it's undetermined really where it's going to lead into. Because as we're saying, Iran has constantly stated that they want no ceasefire with the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine at this point, especially, then I wonder if I'm curious if they'd be willing to go back to if like U.S. completely invaded, and like let's just say in some world they reimbursed the Iran for all the damage they did, like America and Israel reimbursed them. I wonder if they'd still be
Yeah.
willing, even at that point, to go back to the original nuclear agreement which they had struck under by before.
So I was looking at both of the agreements because a lot of people are actually on Twitter stating it was very much the same as Biden's. I mean, as Obama's,
Obama's, yeah,
but it's not on the surface of it, which is kind of what's throwing me off a lot. I mean, I was going on Twitter, every single person was like, "It's the same thing as Obama, same thing as Obama." It's technically not. It's a little stricter, actually, just because it focuses on the ballistic missile aspect and just no enriched uranium across the board. So it is a little bit more stringent in that,
yeah,
but it's I wouldn't even you could say it's almost a facelift from the Obama deal, which was more narrow. I mean, more wide in certain aspects compared to the scope of the Trump administration's deal. But as well, who knows if Iran will even accept that? And Mohammed, you talk about the reparations. Iran has said those are two things that they would take as concessions for a ceasefire and or a deal. One was reparations for the damage, and two was a statement on the aggression of the Iranian regime from the United States and Israel, making it known that we were the aggressors in this conflict. We all know that those two things won't happen,
yeah,
but
absolutely not,
however, they're at
absolutely
least
not.
trying to extend an olive branch after we've broke it multiple times and threw it up in their face. So, with all this going on, Sky News also confirms that the US is backing down and Trump was forced to cancel strikes because Iran's guaranteed retaliation against Israel and the Gulf states would be enormous. And this is why we have that 5-day pause, with the overall cost of the war now deemed too high for sustained operations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke with President Trump and vowed to continue striking targets in Iran and Lebanon, almost acting on their own and not even taking heed to what the United States is saying. Even though we're the ones that are footing the bill for this war, they are just going out in a flurry and just bombing everything left and right. And it's
And
all
what
yeah,
And I find it interesting that they're coupling their advances and offenses in Iran, and Lebanon the same.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
in Iran, they had the argument that it was self defense. I suppose that's also going to be always the argument they use.
Always the
But
argument.
with Lebanon, they're literally going into and invading the country.
Yeah,
So it's
literally.
like two very big different things. And they're just treating it as a normal, any day military offensive without the US's permission or regard into the matter. I
Yep.
wonder if I think it is, especially in the long term. But I wonder if and how heavy Israel has played its hand, and that it's like swinging the table in the opposite direction from where it benefited from.
Like I
Because
really
it's, I mean, look at the overall support for Israel and Palestine over the last 5 years. That change alone is drastic.
yeah, very, very drastic. And it's, I guess you can kind of think of it like if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And this is
Yeah,
kind of the
absolutely,
situation that is
absolutely.
going on with Israel. They're like, okay, we persuaded Trump to bomb Iran in the initial attacks. Okay, cool. Now it's just one thing after another. You told us not to bomb these oil refineries. Going to do it anyway. Told us to not bomb these energy infrastructure. Going to do it anyway. All these things, they're just doing it on their own accord, like they are already a superpower. Like they already don't have ties to financial ties or military ties and support to any other country when that's not the fact of it at all. If we left Israel alone, they would be off the map within 2 years, 2, 3 years by other countries because they understand just the danger that Israel, at least on the Zionist front, plays on the Middle East
I mean,
and a
they
lot of the
essentially
Islamic
get free
religion.
military weapons from us, and that's a
Yeah,
very big part
basically.
of the defense supply. We take we take Americans' money, send it to Israel in the name of economic and military aid, and then they use that to buy weapons and such from us. That's why they say, "Oh, well, any money you guys give us goes right back to America." It goes into the hands of the CEOs
Literally.
and the board of Lockheed Martin, of Boeing, of Northrop,
I
things like
mean,
that,
the industrial
and
military
it's
complex.
yeah, military industrial complex. And what's the most frustrating thing about it is that it's a poor argument because it's just cycling money. One, it's cycling money from the working class to the rich, but also two, it enables this kind of environment to thrive where military is a profitable business and war is something to benefit from for select people, and those select people just happen to have their hands in the higher echelons of government. And I agree. I think most people would agree how much that Israel relies on the United States to defend it, and that if it didn't exist, it would be taken care of fairly quickly in the grand scheme.
Oh
Because if it
yeah,
wasn't for those literally free weapons coming in its direction, they'd be much less underpowered. And I wonder if there is a time, I hope not, but where Israel does go berserk and use its nukes in terms of like last minute defense.
I
That'd be
don't
a
know.
You
That
ever
would
play
be
Fallout, MJ?
yeah. I haven't played Fallout. I watched a little bit of the TV show, didn't fully dive
That'd be a crazy
into it.
way for that game to happen.
What also would be crazy, I shared with you on X, the
Yeah.
QAnon uh, reading, basically them theorizing World War III, and it was like a little less than a paragraph. But what was slated in there, I'm going to see if I'm able to try to pull that up. But it was pretty with some of the things that have already taken place. It was pretty almost spot on. What would you say, Muhammad, from that?
Damn, I mean, it is po things can escalate quickly. You know, like,
Yeah, it's
I
I have it up here. It's like the first few things is Israel breaks ceasefire, strikes Iran. Trump's response would be to bunker busters on nuclear sites. Iran hits all Gulf oil fields and U.S. bases, blocks Hormuz. Next, oil prices skyrocket, blackouts in Africa, third world countries. U.S. sends 3 aircraft carriers, at least 2 sunken by Russia and China with suicide attacks, and it just goes list on and on and on from all the way to Turkey betraying NATO, North Korea invades South Korea with Japan failing to stop it, Russia invades Poland and Baltics, Europe collapses into riots, famine, civil war in the United States after the anti-war bloc takes DC with military action. All of these things are the QAnon space, which was very huge when President Trump was coming up in his presidency.
yeah.
And they have
Honestly,
been
that's not a bad theory at all.
no,
At
I mean,
all.
when they laid it out and I read it, I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, this does not seem too far off from what has been happening and what could happen if things continue to escalate. And with the escalation with Trump making those 5 days not to not have any air raids or anything of that nature. As soon as that was announced, the Israeli Air Force immediately launched a new wave of attacks targeting Iranian infrastructure sites on after Trump's pause, including actions reminiscent of their earlier unilateral hits on the South Pars gas facilities. Outlets describe Israel as going rogue, which they are, and lashing out, with a massive divergence in strategy emerging between Benjamin Netanyahu and the Trump administration. Analysts note that Trump appears to be losing some control over Netanyahu. The dog's leash is very much becoming undone. And this is happening as Israel is continuing to operate independently amid regime destabilization, even as Washington signals openness to negotiations. So, as much as we're putting our own hand out there in certain times, it's Israel that is slapping our hand back and telling us we're the bad boy, the alpha male in it all, and that we need to be listening to them in this sense, and that they are the ones to be able to facilitate these levels of negotiations, even though we all know they don't want negotiations. They want this war to continue on and for Iran to be inherently destroyed, but that's not going to happen. It's not going to
Yeah,
happen.
especially with if especially if the Gulf states continue to take sustained damage,
Yeah,
and I'd be interested to see how much it would actually be like the Gulf states decide to leave or rally up together. I mean, the Emirates are still are probably the strongest ally of Israel in the Middle East, and then Saudi Arabia is like the powerhouse that supports them the most. But not necessarily in the Middle East is Turkey, but if the actions go where the words are, which has been a trend lately, then I think Israel definitely try to make a move against Turkey as well. I mean, it's the part of the greater Israel project, and they said that Turkey will be the
yeah.
next after Iran threat against
They're going to
Israel's
have a tough
existence.
time dealing with Erdogan. Going to have a tough
Yeah,
time dealing with Erdogan because
and also they're like already thinking about the next fight. They don't even they're still dealing with this
yeah,
one.
this fight is still going on, and
The
it's
dog's definitely hungry.
oh no, the dog is definitely hungry, and it was funny to see a video of Bush when he effectively called for mission accomplished in uh, Iraq when he was on the ship giving that speech saying, you know, we won victory X, Y, and Z. I'm sure we're going to see something of that same scenario come from the Trump administration if by chance we are able to lock up a linkage, a cooperation link between us and Iran on the Strait of Hormuz. He will pat himself on the back, staking it as a win when really it's a strategic loss across the board. And
I mean, even
yeah, I
then, it'll be
mean,
a big question of what exactly are the details of the agreement. We've
exactly.
seen Trump lie about things outright to the public and celebrate, boast them. I mean, a big thing was the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. You do still get tax on tips and tax on overtime, but because of his messaging and how much he was just cheering it on, the people thought, "Oh wow, this is actually a big thing," and then they all believed it for months until without actually checking things out. Because I like tax, you know what I mean? I check that out. Point being, though, is that it wouldn't be beneath him to lie about something and boast about it to the public in a manner that is celebratory, even though it's completely untrue.
Yeah, it's completely untrue, and it gives false faith for our military men and women who are in the armed service. We there has been major reports of escalation of thousands of troops getting ready to be moved overseas for Iran, and then they're even looking at air troopers as well, a part of that conglomeration of troops to end up going over there. We do have information on that as well. But like, as we've been saying, Trump has been lying unequivocally as Iran has responded to all the statements that he has made, stating no negotiations have been held with the U.S. despite President Trump's claim. Comes from the Iranian foreign minister and his parliamentary speaker, who labeled Trump's claims as fake news and psychological warfare and an attempt at market manipulation, which what Muhammad was speaking about, which I think I did see that manipulation, or that we'll just call it frenzy of buys and dips that was going on in that S&P 500. It was like he spoke and it shot up Few minutes later, shot back down. Few minutes later, shot back up. Between the, I think it was like an hour, $3 trillion had been swung just in an hour from after he gave his one of his speeches. So people
So
are
a big
insisting.
I
Yeah,
I wanna give some insight into why that
yeah, give
happened.
insight.
So the big issue is that before those moves happen, like 5 minutes before those moves happen, a massive purchase came in for 150 billion, and then that giant swing happened. And how that occurs is the giant swings up and down is in modern day trading, especially. I mean, this even happened back then, and so in different ways, this is what happens for now. Is that what there's a lot of bots involved used by bigger money, big banks, and more investment firms and such that trigger when stocks or other commodities go below a certain price or above a certain price to buy or sell. And when those bots are all triggered and in a very rapid like manner, they build up a lot of pressure, and there's certain like areas where there's people have a lot more set. So then you'll like skyrocket with that big purchase through the weaker zones, and then it gets to an area where a lot of these big money bots have their money set up to sell or buy more, and it then go even further or lower. And it can really be it really was crazy. It's a big reason why you see cryptocurrencies spike so much is because of that concept as well, but it's done on a faster time scale. Damn, it's I wonder how what can be done when the market manipulation is on such a high level, you know? Like, what
Yeah,
will be done?
who knows what will be done? And I actually did see that Polymarket actually had some changes to their I forget what that stuff's called, the user stuff that you read that no one really reads, but you
User agreement?
read it. Yeah, user agreement. Basically, on certain predictive markets, you won't be able to bet on anymore. Apparently, I didn't really
Yeah,
read it in full, but I did see it. And I was like, yeah, that's interesting. After we had the Pam Bondi speech, where she ended it exactly at a certain time, individuals had betted on that, made a whole bunch of money, and she abruptly stopped that press conference. So I am glad to see that these things are being done to remove the teeth from insider trading because it is huge, especially in this predictive market aspect where it's so easy to do. I mean, I've not in insider trading or anything, but I've myself have been thinking about just doubling down almost every week on the House and on the Democrats taking back the House and the Senate, and just seeing where that is by the time
not a
November.
bad idea.
Where November gets you. Maybe throw some on Newsom, who's leading high, or things like that. But it is good to see that they are combating insider information for these levels of betting markets. And with all this manipulation that Trump has been touting during his speeches unknowingly, in a further escalation warning, the country's defense council stated that an attack on Iran's southern coast and islands will lead to Gulf routes being cut with laying of sea mines. Iranian officials threatened to deploy naval mines across the entire Persian Gulf if U.S. or Israeli forces attack Iran's coast or islands. This is from AFP, who is reporting this. And then, however, Israelis Channel 12 reports that senior Iranian officials have agreed to several major demands from the United States to end the war, including a 5-year freeze for its long range ballistic missile program.
That's a
And
crazy ask.
yeah, it's a crazy ask, but
Asking
despite,
America to do that.
yeah, asking America is like, we're not going to do
Ooh,
that.
ooh.
Yeah, yeah, that's not going to happen. And oh well, this is a little different. Did you see what he was with the prime minister of Japan?
Oh, yeah, I did, I
It
did.
was like she was like, a reporter was like, "Why didn't you give us a heads up on the surprise attack against Iran?" He said, "You didn't give me a heads up about the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor." I'm like, bro, he did not just say that.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like, "Are
it
you
is
shitting
really
me right
funny.
now?" I'm not shitting me. I was like, "Are you kidding me right now?" I was like, "Are you like, like that's just the stuff." But however, despite the diplomatic claims, the U.S. military is posturing itself for aggressiveness, where the Trump administration is racing to ship additional air defenses, counter drone equipment, and radars, those very expensive radars that Iran drones were destroying, to the Gulf region and counter persistent Iranian attacks. So while thousands of additional U.S. sailors and Marines, backed by helicopters, F-35s, which I think we saw the first one get shot down just last week, I believe. First one in, I think, American history, an F-35 was shot down. And armored vehicles are now heading to the Middle East, as confirmed by the Washington Post. Pentagon officials are now weighing deployment of a combat brigade of 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers of the Army's 82nd Airborne Division into Iran, specifically to capture Crag Island, as we were saying, the country's main oil export hub, as a contingency for possible limited ground operations or rapid reinforcement if back-channel talks collapse and escalation resumes. So, on the international front as well, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that the alliance cannot confirm Israel's claim that the missiles Iran fired toward the joint US UK base on Diego Garcia were intercontinental ballistic missiles, though he expressed absolute confidence that NATO could secure the Strait of Hormuz if needed. Now, that's an if
Ooh,
needed. So, that's
NATO. That's a interesting thing to
yeah, so
have
he was
there.
saying if NATO could secure, which I think if Trump is able to get all of these countries, the countries in NATO, I think it's about like 14, 15 that have been in the revolving group of being a part of the coalition to take over the Strait of Hormuz. If they are able to, I mean, that will be a big win and big shift globally. But if it goes terribly wrong,
I mean,
that's the
this is a
problem.
damn. I mean, I can actually. Hmm.
Like if it goes terribly wrong, I how do they and that's what the QAnon chat said. It said we
Yeah,
would put ground troops on and it would be massacre. First
yeah.
wave. Second time around, we would be successful. But I'm like, at what loss in the first time do we even think going in again would be suitable and even reputable for the United States, realistically?
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, if they are things can escalate so fast, it's hard to tell exactly where they're gonna go, you know what I mean? I mean, World War One started over
Archduke
member of
Ferdinand.
royalty getting assassinated. Yeah, it wasn't even a prince or a king.
Yeah, Archduke.
Damn. People just wanted to go to war with each other for various reasons, and I mean, that's basically what this is right now. You can use whatever excuse they want, but the Israeli government wants to get rid of Iran for its own benefit in the Middle East, and the U.S. is just using riding its coattails with it.
Yeah, pretty much just riding their coattails, and it's really not going to get them far because, as we're seeing, the United States is overstretching ourselves a lot. Because separately, you have Cuba's government announced it is preparing for potential U.S. military aggression as they have blackouts throughout the whole entire country. Over the weekend, they had blackouts. I'm not too sure currently if there are blackouts, but that was something that happened. In an economic bright spot for Tehran, Iran and Japan are reportedly close to an agreement on oil trade via the Strait of Hormuz that could lock in significant profits for Iran, even as Trump moves to lift sanctions on Iranian oil at sea. So, yes, we are at war with them, but now they're bringing in money because we need oil in the States. And we're lifting up these sanctions on Iranian oil so that there's some level of relief that can come to individuals within the States. So it's going to be interesting to see really what Cuba is going to do to position themselves. As we know, the Warhawks, Lindsey Graham, Pete Hegseth, and all of them have talked about wanting to go after Cuba, Cuba's government. And even more recently, you've had Donald Trump starting to throw his advisors under the bus. Kushner, Hegseth, Witkoff stating that they were the ones to really have a defining voice in the room when it came to the decision to go after Iran and take out the supreme leader.
Yeah,
And which is on their fault. Vance isn't going to see the light of day from his presidency run. I think his percentages are going down ever more, while Newsom only climbs up higher and higher. And voters are going to see this when it comes to 2028, and they're going to vote on this in 2026. So they're going to have a lot of cleaning up to do with everything that's going on, and then wanting to add a significant dose of realism to everything that's going on. U.S. officials told the Washington Post that they believe, like we reported earlier, it's very unlikely to achieve core strategic goals, including overthrowing Iran's theocratic regime and putting a nuclear weapon permanently out of reach. These developments underscore the war's profound global ripple effects as the straight disruption has already created an energy crunch worse than the 1970s oil crisis. And I think during that time, that's when you had very long gas lines, individuals fighting over gas within the United States. It was a very bleak time. And with it being just as worse as then, who knows what the summer is going to look like, what the fall and winter will look like for families having to
especially
pay
as this
the
war drags on. Like, if it keeps dragging on, which it
yeah,
likely will.
100%. It's only going to get worse. Only going to get worse. And then adding to all of that and the pain, the economic pain at home, higher grocery prices could soon hit supermarkets as the war with Iran continues. The higher prices are because of a surge in the cost of diesel fuel, which powers many of the vehicles transporting products across the vast global supply chain. For direct context on how this is affecting your wallet, here's a clear comparison between the end of the Biden administration and the current Trump administration. So this is just a breakdown on um, some goods that are out there that individuals or constituents and citizens are using, just really showing the vast difference in pricing. You have gasoline, the regular national average under Biden in 2025 when he left office was between $3.12 and $3.13. We now have that's a plus 83 cent, 84 cent change. Now we have $3.95 as the national average. You have electricity, 15.9 to 16.9 cents per kilowatt. Now you have 17.24 to 18.5, a 1.3 to 2.1 change. Then looking at crude oil under Biden, $76. Now under Trump, it sits around 89.96. Even at the highest level it's reached was I think 110, 111.
Yeah.
And then looking at heating oil, $3.49 per gallon under Joe Biden. Under Trump, $5.16. $5.16. Looking at coal, 76 dollars or up to $116. Under the Trump administration today, $146.50. And then looking at beef, $5.55, $5.63 under the Biden administration. Now $6.74, $6.75. These are the facts. These are the facts. Prices have gone up not strategically, have gone up enormously by this administration and the lackluster care they have of actually rolling out meaningful legislation and also taking to time to actually flesh out their course of action, the way they do things. Like as individuals in the Treasury has said, the consumers are not what's important. And as Trump has said, who gives a shit about
Such a
housing?
crazy thing to say, honestly, that the
Yeah, yeah.
consumers are not
Consumers
important.
are not important, and that no one gives a shit about housing, and just all these things on the domestic front. He is failing on across the board. His only big thing was the big beautiful bill, which shoots more Republicans in the foot than they actually know. And this war only continues to rise in costs, exceeding 18 billion and a 200 billion supplemental request pending from the Pentagon. So we have money for all the wars, all the missiles, and all of that stuff, but we don't have it for the basic needs in America because, according to the Trump administration, they don't give a crap about them. As we've seen from private conversations that have been had, these are not emotions. This is just facts that are reported on a daily basis on this podcast. And Trump is projecting optimism about a swift resolution through back channeling. And actually, before I get to that, I actually want to state Trump is also responsible for 27% of the national debt. So
Yeah.
for two presidencies, that's a pretty big chunk of it. 27% is where he
Bill
sits
Clinton
at.
had the budget balanced. kind
Yeah,
of
he
crazy
had
to
the
think about.
yeah, it's very crazy to think about that he had
Yeah.
the budget balance, but that's what happens when you have such a disastrous Republican and then a Democrat is able to come in and clean up what happens. As I was saying, Trump is projecting optimism about a swift resolution through back channeling, diplomacy, and specific concessions on Iran's nuclear program, missiles, and the Strait. Yet Iran's immediate denials, and as Israel continues unilateral strikes and the ongoing U.S. troop surge, paint a picture of fragile, high stakes maneuvering. This pause is going to buy 5 days of breathing room, but we will see what happens as we know that Israel is launching these attacks. But whether it leads to a genuine deal or renewed escalation remains uncertain as of this afternoon.
I mean,
Really?
I think that Iran's going to permanently be linking America with Israelis' actions. So I think that as long as
Oh,
Israel
yeah,
continues to do
yeah.
what they're doing, there's not going to be any beneficial change.
It's not going to be beneficial. I know, Muhammad, if you saw this, it's kind of like I saw this and I was like, no surprise about this one. Independent analysts and outlets, including the Gray Zone, the Alternet, and researcher Stephen McIntry, have highlighted that the White House's official justification for launching strikes on Iran, which is detailed in its March 2nd, 2026 statement listing decades of alleged Iranian terrorism against Americans, appears to have been plagiarized almost word for word from a June 2025 document produced by the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Critics describe FDD as a pro Israel think tank, originally founded to enhance Israel's image in North America with deep ties to former APAC staff and Israeli interests. Sometimes characterized as an effective cutout of Israeli intelligence perspectives in Washington. A side by side comparison showed the documents are virtually identical, with only minor wording changes that intensify allegations against Iran. We're seeing that not only was Trump persuaded, not only has Lindsey Graham coached Netanyahu on how to persuade Trump, we're seeing that we're copying and pasting their own justifications
It's
for the
funny to be
war.
thinking about the president of the United States plagiarizing. You know, what I mean, like not him directly, but like his administration. They're like, ah, screw it. Just
It's ridiculous.
this group said reference this paper. We'll just use the paper.
It's absolutely ridiculous that when I saw this, I was like, I'm like, how much more easier you're going to make it for people to turn on Israel and to turn on administration if these things just keep coming out. I mean, America First has been down the toilet and through the drain, out in the ocean at this point. Where, I mean, everyone across the board, major, huge Republicans are switching sides. Rogue and Fuentes, as we've talked about. I mean, it's just a mass exodus, and I hope Democrats can really just pick up on this and just win across the board. And I hope there is no hand holding that takes place. And I hope prosecutions and uh, Republicans in courtrooms is what happens because it's pretty egregious the level of damage that has been done on a national, state, municipal level, and that's rounding out about our global section. I know that was a lot, but it is a lot of information. We want to make sure that we're getting to you guys in the best way and form. And as we all know, while the Iranian conflict dominates headlines, a parallel domestic issues unfolding at home that is directly affecting millions of American travelers and reshaping midterm politics. The Department of Homeland Security has been partially shut down since mid-February 2026 after funding lapsed, leaving critical agencies including TSA, FEMA, the Coast Guard, and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency without full year appropriations. This has triggered widespread airport chaos, long security lines stretching 2 hours or more at hubs, even going into parking lots in some areas. Unpaid TSA agents calling in sick or quitting in droves in smaller airports at risk of closure, just as spring break travel surges. Now, with all that going on, I want to make, before I continue on, I want to make our listeners understand that the privatization of TSA, if you could just think where you could find that in any document, it's going to be in Project 2025. That's where that is. If you look in there, the privatization of TSA is 1,000% in there. I've read it, I've saw it. It is within that document. However,
Truth be
President
told, I
Trump.
don't think that's a horrible idea. TSA is incredibly inefficient. They just cost taxpayer money.
No, but like this is the cause of it. You know,
Yeah.
it breeds it you destabilize so that you can try to reform, not just reform outright without destabilizing.
Yeah.
That's what their strategy is and has been. And President Trump has made clear he is deliberately blocking. I'll say that again. President Trump has made clear he is deliberately blocking any standalone or clean funding bill for TSA and the rest of DHS unless Democrats agree to pass the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the SAVE Act. Understand that. He does not want TSA paid. He wants longer lines until this SAVE Act is done. And Speaker Mike Johnson was caught on hot mic speaking to, I believe, another one of his colleagues. And he was saying, talking about the SAVE Act, he's like, yeah, 18, 19% of the American population would be able to vote under this bill. He's like, this is good for Republicans. So they are understanding that this is just a disenfranchisement bill.
Yeah.
20 million Americans don't have what is specified within the bill to even register, to re-register to vote, and even to vote in person. Birth certificate's not good enough. ID, driver's license is not good enough. It's passport and all of these documents that modern Americans don't have. And what's even funnier, majority of Republicans don't have these documents. So
Yeah.
not only are they shooting themselves in the foot with this whole TSA thing, with the SAVE Act, just looking at the legislation, just breaking it down on simple terms, it does no better for Democrats or Republicans. It is a far-fetched dream that there is fraud out there in these elections, and it's reported that it's like 0.000 point like 1 2% that these things even happen. Heritage Foundation, Republican think tank, has stated out the facts on these, not the feelings that everyone wants to dive into when it comes to voter fraud or things of that nature.
That saying makes me laugh every time. Like, I can just imagine Ben Shapiro's geeky ass voice saying it. Facts don't care about your feelings. And
Yeah, I
then,
mean, and this is the
and
same case.
now that like the table's gone the other way and they're the ones in power who have to do the explaining for why things are so poor,
Yeah,
they just completely obstruct from that and go with the more, this is Joe Biden's economy, even though it's been 15
I
months of
can't stand
Donald
that.
Trump.
Yeah, so these were Joe Biden prices. Like, sir, I just read it. It was 312 when you left
Yeah,
office.
who's the president? I just went outside, saw the gas. Who's president right now? Not Joe Biden. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like with this whole Save Act and this just the nonsense of what it's trying to do. And Trump has been stating on News Nation interviews and True Social that congressional Republicans should make no deal on the DHS funding until the Save Act advances it, calling it far more important than anything else, and vowing to withhold support from any GOP lawmaker who compromises, echoing his exact strategy last year when he helped kill a bipartisan border security bill that would have added agents, technology, and asylum reforms in exchange for funding. So we're seeing it again. He's putting himself at the forefront of this, not even thinking of it in an American first mindset. Because even if you look at that bill and you say it's America first, that means you haven't read the bill and you don't know the specifics of the bill. And that's not even trying to talk down to individuals. It's just what Republicans are going to put out there is what they want you to hear and see on the perspective of the bill. If you just look through it yourself, or even just ask Grok or Chat GBT, it will literally tell you the bill is disenfranchising voters and the millions of Americans that won't have access to a ballot box. It won't even um, hinder that much to illegal voting because those things are very minuscule in turn. And unfortunately, they have been mostly by the Republican Party on reported cases. So, and with this continued standoff on the SAVE Act, we're now seeing that ICE agents are going to be going to the airports. They are there today to help facilitate and help out with the chaos and all the lines. And there was a video that came out of a mother with her daughter, I believe,
I
being
saw that.
taken by ICE for being in the country illegal. Which in the country illegal, I understand it, totally get it. But the way that it's just having them there in that sense doesn't do any better when they are probably one of the least supportive agencies in America. Like you could have any. You should, I think it would. I don't know. I feel like the National Guard would have been a better, you know, outlook than
Yeah, I mean,
ICE
have
agents. You know what I mean? Just because they're viewed in the
I feel like
better
it's
light.
purposeful to have ICE agents at the airports, though.
Oh no, it's 100%. It's 100% purposeful because he's,
Yeah,
helping with TSA as well as still wanting to go after illegal immigration, even though mass deportations hasn't been talked about. Like, think about it. When's the last time you heard President Trump beat his
they said they're
chest?
backing down from
Yeah,
mass
they're backing
deportations,
down on
actually.
mass deportations because they understand how unfavorable it is and how much of a sham it's been. Um, and they're not even going to bring it up for the midterms because they know it's a losing topic. It took a year and 3 months for his number one issue to fail flat on its face. And both Democrats and Republicans have offered Trump a bipartisan off ramp proposal that would fund all of DHS just except ICE through a quick Senate vote, with ICE funding to be handled later through budget reconciliation. Democrats argued the approach protects American rights and prevents overreach at ICE and Border Patrol. Republicans insist everything must be funded together with additional resources for enforcement, which I think splitting it up in two bills is the way to go. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I
you don't
think
want
it's
to
much
have
better
this.
to pass segments of things instead of one giant
Yeah,
omni-bill or
yeah,
package, but that's
exactly.
always what they do.
Yeah, they add in all the pork into the bill. That's what it's called. All of the little Christmas tree items and things of that nature that they want for their own district and their own yeah, basically their own district, state, whatever. Um, yeah, that's just something. It could just be a whole new bill. Do it as a standalone bill because I feel like in that way, then you could actually have it in the sense to where um, Democrats would have to vote on the bill and just have the reforms added to it. It doesn't seem like the reforms are too far fetched. Sorry, my dog's over here biting at my
It's
shoes.
okay. It's okay.
Too far fetched to be something that is digestible by Republicans. Because I think that the reforms that have been laid out are pretty substantial and should be done almost in every agency to allow for transparency and or the safety of Americans when they are doing these levels of operations. And then on the SAVE Act, still, Johnson repeatedly told colleagues that the bill could drive voter turnout down dramatically to just 12 to 18% in some
Give me a
scenarios,
moment.
which he describes as huge for Republicans, framing it not purely as election security, but as a strategic advantage in surpassing particularly participation among certain voter groups. The comment, widely circulated from video clips and reported across outlets, including social media and news recaps, has intensified accusations that the SAVE Act is less about preventing fraud and more about voter suppression ahead of the 2026 midterms. Critics, including the Brennan Center for Justice and the Center for American Progress, warn that the SAVE Act's strict documentary proof requirements would disenfranchise millions of eligible American citizens. The Brennan Center estimates that more than 21 million voting age U.S. citizens, roughly 9% of the total, lack ready access to the required documentation like a passport or a birth certificate. About half of all American adults, approximately 140 or 146 million, do not even possess a passport. And as many as 69 million married women whose legal names do not match their birth certificates would face extra hurdles to re register. These barriers would hit younger voters, voters of color, rural residents, military voters, survival of natural disasters, and low income Americans the hardest, while also ending convenient online and mail in registration methods used by the vast majority of voters in recent cycles. So with all that going on, they still would have tried to push this Save Act and still trying to frame it as a way to save America, but it's really to save the Republican Party because they know that they are SOL once he's right here. He's gonna be SOL once these midterms come around, and it's compounded on the election integrity debate with the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know, Muhammad, if you saw this. I'm a little worried about this because I know they're also poised to change a piece of the Voting Rights Act, the Section 3, I believe. Um, Supreme Court is actively taking up a major ruling on mail-in ballots in the case Watson v. RNC, originating from a challenge to Mississippi's law and similar statutes in roughly 16 to 30 other states and DC that allows absentee ballots postmarked by election day to be counted if received within a short grace period afterward. Typically, 5 business days is that grace period.
Yeah.
Oral argument, yeah, yeah.
No, I just said yeah, as in like, like
I was
go on. Yeah.
Oral arguments are underway or imminent as this week. So we will have that for you if there is an opinion that is laid out and what could come from that. The Supreme Court seems skeptical of laws in 14 states that allow counting of mail ballots that arrive after Election Day. The Republican National Committee argues that federal election day statutes require ballots to be received by election day, not just postmarked, which could invalidate hundreds of thousands of voters nationwide, as seen looking at 2024 data, and forces states to scrap long-standing practices that accommodate military, overseas, and rural voters. A ruling in favor of the challengers would represent a significant tightening of mail-in voting rules directly intersecting with the SAVE Act. SAVE Act's broader push for stricter eligibility and registration requirements and raising stakes even higher for how Americans cast ballots amid the ongoing partisan standoff. And that standoff and what's going to come forth from the Supreme Court, because they have these two very big cases that deal in with voting across the board. This could very much change a lot of how these elections in 2026 are going to take place, depending upon especially that Voting Rights Act when they lay down that opinion. And then just lastly here on the economic and political ripple effects have been immediate. Families are dealing with canceled or delayed flights during peak travel season, inflation pressures compounding the oil volatility from the Iran conflict, voters increasingly frustrated with Washington gridlock, this TSA DHS drama, unpaid essential workers, travel nightmares, and partisan brinkmanship mirrors the 2024 border bill collapse and is already becoming a flashpoint for midterm elections on both sides.
Yeah, this
And
is a
when
hell of a time for this all to be happening for the
no, literally,
not in a good way either.
no, not in a good way at all. And it's all a pattern. It's all a pattern from
Yeah.
how this administration operates. You see from one area, everything connects together in what they are trying to do. And this SAVE Act is no different from that. This war in Iran is no different from that. We are seeing an administration that is not owning up and actually taking care of the American people. They are taking care and they are bowing their head to the Israeli government time and time again. And it's going to be up to us voters in 26, 28 to see whether or not we want to have another administration, another political party calling the shots, as we've seen with the year and 3 months, what a unified I say Republican Party can do. But as all of these updates continue to divulge and continue to escalate, always be here to check. Always be here at Behind the Ballot 6:30 to check in on these updates and also for our episodes as well. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into Behind the Ballot, where we keep politics engaged, balanced, and informative. Stay curious, stay critical, and stay involved. I'm Mikkel Jenkins. And until next time, keep looking beyond the headlines and behind the ballot.
And I'm Muhammad Alec. Thank you all for listening. God bless America.